A summer road trip in the United States is less a single kind of journey than a moving cross-section of geology, history, and local identity, stitched together by pavement. The country's most scenic routes aren't just pretty corridors between points on a map. They're outdoor museums of mountain building and river carving, living archives of migration and industry, and sometimes quiet witnesses to conflict and change. What follows are 15 routes that reward a warm-weather drive with big landscapes, memorable towns, and the kind of context that makes a view feel earned. Start with the Pacific Coast Highway, California's State Route 1, where the Santa Lucia Range drops into the Pacific in a long, dramatic surrender. The stretch through Big Sur is the headline act. Cliffs, redwood groves, and the famous Bixby Creek Bridge, completed in 1932, which turned an isolated coastline into a drivable spectacle. Summer often brings coastal fog that drifts in like a curtain. It can hide the ocean one minute and reveal it the next. Pullouts near McWay Falls in Julia Pfeiffer Burns State Park and the bluffs around Garrapata make the geology legible. Uplifted rock, wave-cut terraces, and a shoreline shaped by the restless boundary between the Pacific and North American plates. Travel tip: book lodging early and keep an eye on road conditions. Landslides periodically close sections, and detours can be long. North of there, the Oregon coast on U.S. 101 offers a different mood. Cooler air, broad beaches, and sea stacks rising like black teeth from the surf. This is a coast of working harbors and shipwreck stories, where lighthouses such as Heceta Head, lit in 1894, still keep watch over headlands. Cannon Beachs Haystack Rock is a monolith of basalt and a protected nesting site for tufted puffins in spring and early summer. Farther south, the dunes near Florence are a reminder that coast can mean shifting sand as much as rocky cliffs. Plan for changing weather, even in July, and bring layers. The Pacific here is brisk, and the wind is rarely shy. For a route that feels engineered to show off the American West, take Going to the Sun Road in Glacier National Park, Montana. Carved into steep terrain during the early automobile era and completed in 1932, it's a National Historic Landmark for good reason. An audacious ribbon of road that climbs to Logan Pass, where mountain goats and bighorn sheep often appear with little warning. Summer is the narrow window when the road is reliably open, and even then, snowfields can linger. The drive is a crash course in glaciation. U-shaped valleys, hanging waterfalls, and lakes that look impossibly clear because they're fed by cold, mineral-light meltwater. Time it early in the day to avoid congestion and to catch the sharpest light on the peaks. In Wyoming, the Grand Teton Scenic Loop, linking Jackson, Moose, Jenny Lake, and the Park Roads, delivers one of North America's cleanest mountain silhouettes. The Tetons rise abruptly, without the foothills that soften most ranges, because of active faulting that lifts the mountains while the valley drops. Summer brings wildflowers in the meadows and long evenings when the peaks turn copper. The human story is just as compelling. This landscape was shaped not only by ice and tectonics, but by conservation politics, including the controversial expansion of the park in the mid-20th century. A practical note: dawn is prime time for wildlife, moose in willow flats, elk in open meadows, and it's also when the roads feel most spacious. If you want a route where the road itself is a cultural artifact, follow the Blue Ridge Parkway through Virginia and North Carolina. Conceived during the Great Depression as both a jobs program and a scenic motor road, it threads Appalachian ridgelines with a measured, unhurried rhythm, designed for overlooks rather than speed. Summer here is green, dense, and musical. Small towns nearby keep old-time and bluegrass traditions alive, and the parkway's access points lead to craft centers, historic cabins, and trailheads. Near Asheville, detour to Mount Pisgah for cooler air and expansive views. Farther north, the peaks of Otter rise like islands from a sea of forest. Drive it like it was intended, slow, windows open, stopping often. In Utah and Arizona, Scenic Byway 12, often called Utah's All-American Road, is a masterclass in color and erosion. It runs through a sequence of landscapes that feel like different planets. The slick rock and hoodoos near Bryce Canyon, the high forests of Boulder Mountain, the narrow spine of road across the Hogback with steep drop-offs on both sides, and the sculpted desert near Capitol Reef. The route passes near Grand Staircase Escalante, a region famous among paleontologists for dinosaur fossils and ancient ecosystems preserved in stone. Summer heat can be intense at lower elevations, so plan hikes early. Carry more water than you think you need, and remember that cell service can be sparse. Part of the appeal, but also a safety reality. Colorado's San Juan Skyway forms a loop through some of the Rockies' most dramatic terrain, connecting Durango, Silverton, Ouray, and Telluride. This is mining country, where the wealth of silver and gold drew booms and busts, and where narrow-gauge railroads still run as living history. The million-dollar highway segment between Silverton and Ouray is famous for its vertigo-inducing drops and lack of guardrails in places. Stunning, but not the best choice for drivers uneasy with heights. Summer brings alpine wildflowers and access to high passes, while towns preserve Victorian facades and stories of hard winters and harder labor. Afternoon thunderstorms are common. Start early and watch for sudden weather changes at elevation. For a route that traces the spine of a continent, drive the Beartooth Highway, U.S. 212, between Red Lodge, Montana and the Yellowstone region. Charles Kuralt once called it the most beautiful drive in America. And even if you resist superlatives, the scenery is hard to argue with. A high-elevation plateau of tundra, snowfields that can persist into summer, and switchbacks that reveal new horizons with each turn. This is a place where you can see the logic of altitude, trees thinning, then disappearing, until the landscape becomes rock, sky, and water. Bring a jacket even in July. Temperatures at nearly 11,000 feet can feel like a different season. In Washington, the North Cascades Highway, State Route 20, is a lesson in ruggedness. The North Cascades are sometimes called the American Alps, not for charm, but for sheer glaciated steepness. The drive passes Diablo Lake, whose striking turquoise color comes from glacial flour, fine rock particles suspended in the water that scatter light. This corridor also reflects the region's hydroelectric history, with dams and power infrastructure tucked into dramatic valleys. Summer is the best time for access, but it's also when hikers and climbers crowd trailheads. If you can, pause at Washington Pass Overlook and let your eyes follow the serrated ridgelines. This is a landscape still being carved. For a different kind of grandeur, take US 50 across Nevada, famously nicknamed the loneliest road in America. The name is more invitation than warning. This route crosses a basin and range landscape where mountain chains rise like waves frozen mid-swell, and valleys stretch long and quiet between them. Towns such as Ely and Austin carry mining histories, railroad echoes, and a sense of distance that feels increasingly rare. Summer skies can be enormous, and the night stars are startling if you stay out late enough. The essential tip here is practical. Fuel up whenever you can, keep extra water in the car, and treat the empty miles as part of the experience rather than a gap to be endured. In Arizona, the drive from Flagstaff to Sedona via Oak Creek Canyon, State Route 89A, compresses ecosystems into a single, scenic descent. You begin in high ponderosa pine forests near Flagstaff's volcanic plateau, then drop into a canyon of sandstone walls and running water, and finally emerge into Sedona's red rock country, where buttes and spires glow at sunrise and late afternoon. The region holds deep indigenous histories and living communities. It's also shaped by 20th century tourism and art colonies that turned the landscape into a visual icon. Summer monsoon season can bring sudden storms and flash floods. Check weather forecasts before hiking in narrow canyons. For an American classic with a complicated legacy, follow Route 66 from Chicago toward Los Angeles, sampling key stretches rather than chasing every mile. Established in 1926, Route 66 became a symbol of mobility and reinvention, and during the Dust Bowl, it carried migrants west in search of work and survival. Its roadside culture, motor courts, diners, neon signs, flourished in the mid-20th century before interstates bypassed many towns. Today, places like the Wigwam Motel in Holbrook, Arizona, and the restored neon of Tucumcari, New Mexico, keep the aesthetic alive, while museums and memorials remind you that the road's romance often traveled alongside hardship. Summer travel tip. The southwest sections can be brutally hot. Plan driving hours for mornings and evenings, and keep your car's cooling system in good shape. In the southeast, Florida's Overseas Highway, US 1 from Miami to Key West, is a road trip that feels like crossing water more than land. Built in part atop the old Overseas Railroad, which was completed in 1912 under Henry Flagler, and then devastated by the Labor Day hurricane of 1935, the highway is a feat of engineering and a story of vulnerability. The 7-mile bridge is the centerpiece, a long, low arc over shallow blue that makes the horizon feel close. Along the way, you'll find coral reef ecology, fishing culture, and a chain of communities with their own rhythms. Islamorada's sport fishing, Marathon's working waterfront, Key West's literary hauntings. Summer is humid and storm-prone. Watch hurricane forecasts and remember that the sun reflecting off water can intensify exposure. Sunscreen and hydration matter here. In Minnesota, the North Shore Scenic Drive along Lake Superior, largely Highway 61 from Duluth toward the Canadian border, offers a freshwater version of coastal drama. Lake Superior behaves like an inland sea, with sudden squalls and a horizon that can look oceanic. This route passes historic ports and lighthouses, then climbs into a shoreline of basalt cliffs and pebble beaches shaped by ancient lava flows and glacial action. Summer brings access to waterfalls like Gooseberry Falls and the hiking network of Tetagooch State Park. The cultural layer includes Ojibwe history and the legacy of shipping and iron ore that powered industrial growth. Even in summer, the lake air can be cool. Pack accordingly. For a New England route that balances scenery with national history, drive the Kancamagus Highway, Route 112, in New Hampshire's White Mountains, and connect it with nearby roads through small towns and notches. The Kancamagus itself, built in the mid-20th century, is named for a 17th century Pinnacook leader, a reminder that these mountains have older human histories than their postcard image suggests. Summer is hiking season. Trailheads lead to cascades, swimming holes, and high viewpoints. Nearby, the Mount Washington area carries a reputation for extreme weather. Even if you don't summit, the region's meteorological fame adds texture to the landscape. Weekends can be busy. Weekdays offer a quieter, more contemplative drive. In South Dakota, the Black Hills Scenic Byway Network, especially the Wildlife Loop in Custer State Park and the drives linking Needles Highway and Iron Mountain Road, packs wildlife, granite spires, and layered history into a compact region. Bison herds roam with the calm authority of animals that were nearly erased from the continent's plains. The Black Hills are sacred to the Lakota and other indigenous nations. And the region's history includes conflict, broken treaties, and ongoing disputes over land and sovereignty. Nearby, Mount Rushmore and the Crazy Horse Memorial represent contrasting visions of commemoration, one completed, one still in progress. And both spark important questions about who gets carved into the landscape and why. Summer tip: give wildlife generous space. Bison may look slow, but they can move quickly, and they do not negotiate with cars. Finally, for a road trip that reads like a timeline of American settlement and scenery, take the Columbia River Gorge Scenic Highway in Oregon and pair it with Washington's side of the river. This corridor was a major route for indigenous trade long before it became a passage for explorers and later pioneers on the Oregon Trail. The historic Columbia River Highway, begun in 1913, was designed as a scenic experience from the start, with stonework, viewpoints, and access to waterfalls like Multnomah Falls. The gorge is also a wind corridor, famous among kiteboarders and windsurfers near Hood River. Summer brings crowds, so arrive early for popular stops, and consider lesser-known hikes to see the gorge's mossy canyons and basalt walls without the bottlenecks. Taken together, these routes show how the United States can change character in a single day's drive. Fog to desert heat, tundra to coral blue shallows, industrial river towns to high passes where snow lingers in July. The best summer road trips reward a traveler who treats the road as more than a line between attractions. Build in time for overlooks and local museums, for conversations in diners and small-town bookstores, for the short hikes that turn a viewpoint into a memory. And travel with humility toward the landscapes and communities you pass through, because the most scenic routes in the country are also some of its most storied, shaped by natural forces and human choices that are still unfolding.